all the negative reviews, because of all the bad things that have been said about this movie, and I'll be honest, because of a chat room associate's complete derision of this movie, I had to go see it. I mean, this person told me that this movie was worse than Thor: The Dark World. Okay, so I'm like, oh, I gotta see this. So I asked my son, hey, let's go check this movie out. He was like, okay, what else I got to do? It started out pretty decent. I was kind of into it. I thought Jared Leto absolutely looked the part. He looks frail even without the makeup. I thought he was perfectly cast, and I liked his performance. One of the reasons I wanted to go see this film was because, you know, I've gone through all of the vampire stuff, you know, Bram Stoker's Dracula going all the way back to the late 80s, True Blood, the entire series, devoured it. I didn't get into Twilight. That's that, what's that, tween or teen rom-com stuff? No, I'm not doing that. But I was interested in seeing it to see a different take on the creation of a vampire, and this is an origin movie. I thought rather than seeing someone who is forced to become a vampire or is seduced by a vampire, which is the way it typically goes, I like the fact that this was the creation of a vampire that was born out of an illness, out of a desperation to cure an illness. Basically, again, it's the Bruce Banner story, how a scientist tampers with forces beyond his control or that he shouldn't tamper with, and how he pays the price at the end. I love that premise. So I was all in. The movie gets a little murky right towards the end of the first act when MORBIUS undergoes his first transformation. I got the impression that he couldn't control his transformations into the vampire. Now, in the comic books, and I don't know that much about the character, I'm familiar with the character. I know he's an enemy of Spider-Man. He's an anti-hero, so he's not so much a villain. But I think he's permanently transfigured or transformed into the vampire. He's permanently disfigured. He looks like a bat, or he has the features of a bat. In this movie, I wasn't clear, can he transform at will? Because sometimes he transforms when he wants to, but then other times he transforms only when he gets a bloodthirst. And that's another subplot, that he has created this formula called artificial blood, and he drinks that to satisfy his bloodthirst so he doesn't have to drink the blood of human beings and kill them. So I wasn't clear. Well, if he can control it in one aspect, then what's the problem? But then it's postulated that he can't control it because of his hunger for blood. So it wasn't very clear, to me at least. The makeup effects on Jared Leto when he transforms into the vampire are pretty awesome. I don't know if it's CGI or if it's practical makeup effects, but they look great. Like I said, Jared Leto was perfectly cast in this role. Where the movie totally falls flat is in the villain. The villain is played by Matt Smith, who has, to me, the weirdest facial structure ever. Every time I see that guy, I think about this movie, directed by Peter Bogdanovich. Yeah, it's something about his face that disturbs me. I can't lie. He put everything into this role, playing the villain. It's one of the weakest aspects of the film, of the entire film. And if you don't have a good antagonist, me personally, I don't think you have a good film. And that's where this movie falls apart. Basically, this character is a childhood friend of Michael Morbius. And they meet each other at a, I guess you'd call him a sanitarium back in that time, or back in London, I guess it was. But it's a place where children are kept who have incurable diseases, I guess. And they meet up there and they become friends. Well, then we flash forward so many years later when they're both adults, and inexplicably, Matt Smith's character who, this was another confusing thing to me. His name was Lucius or something like that, Lucian. But then his name changed to Milo. That's what Michael Morbius named him as a kid, Milo. But then, as an adult, Matt Smith's character calls himself Milo. So that was confusing to me as well. Anyway, somehow Milo has become this wealthy person, and we're never told how that happens, where he got his money from. And for whatever reason, the headmaster of the place where the kids are getting treatment, he's now working for Milo. None of that is explained, how Milo got his wealth, or why the head doctor or headmaster would be working for him independently now. But this movie is woefully short on character development. If I'm not mistaken, I don't recall us really getting any type of, in-depth and, just an explanation of what Morbius and Milo, what their ailments are. We get no explanation of why Milo turns into a psychopath, other than a scene where he, as a child, gets beaten up in an alley. Well, to me, that's not really enough to explain why Milo becomes the, like I say, psychopath, sociopath that he becomes. Other than the fact that as adults, Morbius and Milo meet up, and Milo's like, oh, you've discovered a cure. And Morbius, knowing what the cure, quote unquote, has done to him, how it's cursed him, he refuses to give it to Milo. Well, that's a case where we see in TV and in movies all the time, where a simple conversation would then end the whole story, and then you'd have no story. I mean, given that they were childhood friends going through a terrible illness, one would think that Morbius would confide in Milo and say, this is why I'm not giving it to you, because this is what it did to me. And then Milo would have that trust not to reveal that. But no, we gotta have a story, no matter how shallow it is. So that conversation never takes place. And we just have to accept that Milo is a psychopath who, just wants to feed on humans and has no other recourse. He just likes to kill human beings to drink their blood. He doesn't want to try to figure out a solution like Morbius does. Why does he take that path? Well, you got to figure that out. It's a situation where you, the audience, has to fill in all the gaps that the screenplay didn't bother to fill in. There's a scene with Matt Smith where he's getting dressed up to go out on the town. I forget what he was going to do. But they spend like a good, a minute or so with him just dancing alone in his room, putting on his suit, checking himself out in the mirror, and combing his hair, and he does everything short of doing that type of thing. And I guess that scene, as stupid as it was the scene that we were supposed to tie in to the fact that, oh yeah, he's a bad guy. Because they always have bad guys dancing in a room by themselves, or doing martial arts or Tai Chi in the room by themselves. That's the clue. That's the hint that he's a bad guy. So midway through the second act, my heart started to sink, because I realized that there's no story here. The story basically is just about these two guys who become living vampires. One hates it, one loves it. The one who hates it is the good guy. The one who loves being the living vampire is the bad guy. And eventually, they're gonna fight each other, and the good guy's gonna win. So, middle of the second act, I was like, okay, let's just get this going. There's nothing here. The villain is totally not. His motivation is just the most basic, non-interesting motivation to be a bad guy. Let's just push this along. And sure enough, in the third act, there's a huge CGI battle with a lot of regular motion, slow motion, regular motion, fighting, fisticuffs, crashing through windows, nothing that you attach yourself to whatsoever. And then, I'm gonna spoil it, at the end, Morbius just points his fingers at the bad guy, and all of a sudden a bunch of bats fly into the area and start to push the bad guy, and he falls on a stake or something like that, and that's it. Yeah, I just spoiled the movie. There's nothing to spoil. We could have done so much more with this. Our society, our world just went through, or we're still struggling with, I like to think we're on the tail end of a pandemic. So there's no way that you could write a screenplay that kind of holds a mirror up to this pandemic and whether or not people are getting vaccinated, and you've got a character who has a grave illness, and he goes to no end to try to cure that illness and injects himself without any true sustained trials. You don't see a parallel that you could draw and make this so much more interesting and make it reflect real life, and thereby have your audience attach to it or invest in it more? This is the laziest of all screenwriting. Oh yeah, and Tyrese stars in this. I'm not sure why. Because all his character does whenever he appears on camera is to walk into a scene, survey the scene, realize that he's 5 steps behind whatever happened, and then he walks off. That's pretty much it. He adds 0 to the story. Well, hell, the script added 0 to the story. There are 2 end credit scenes, and I think that, I don't know if this is spoiling or not, but they feature Michael Keaton as the Vulture. And my son asked an interesting question, which I think has been asked on all the social networks, all the social platforms. We see Michael Keaton dressed in his Vulture suit, but it's obvious that he is from another universe or another multiverse, whatever you want to call it. He shows up in this particular universe, and the first question my son had was, well, wait a minute. In No Way Home, the reason people were drawn into the alternate universe is because they knew who Peter Parker was. They knew he was Spider-Man, if I'm not mistaken. So why was the Vulture drawn into a universe that has no ties to Spider-Man at all? Because my son made the argument that he just feels like there would have been some presence of Spider-Man in this movie, or something that would indicate that the Avengers, which would have included Spider-Man, were a part of this film. And I argued with my son and said, well, we just didn't know. Maybe we didn't know. We didn't see that. Maybe it was in the universe of the Avengers. But my son has a point. It seemed like they would have made some reference to the Battle of New York or something. The second question was, assuming this universe is not the universe where the Avengers fought the Chitauri, then how did Michael Keaton, how was he able to make his wings, get that costume? Hey, like I said, this is a fill-in screenplay. A fill-in screenplay where they want you, the audience, who's not being paid, actually you're paying to see it, but they're getting paid to write it, but they want you, who's not getting paid, to fill in the script. So, you know what? I'm feeling generous. It's a nice day. The sun is out. I'm going to give this movie 2 stars. And I give it 2 stars as opposed to 1 or none, which I would have given to it because there's no story here, nothing of interest. But the first act is pretty decent. Jared Leto, I liked his character. And I'm talking about Jared Leto, who I think is a good actor, but in terms of comic book movies, he played the worst Joker ever portrayed on screen or TV, but he was the saving grace of this movie. So I'm giving it 2 stars for him and him alone. Yeah, all right, so there you have it. I doubt there will be a Morbius 2, so there you go. And one last thing I want to say is, to my chat room associate, this was not worse than The Dark World, or The Dark World. I will give it that as well. All right, everyone, that's the martini. Take care.